Rick and Morty presents Hericktics of Rick. It starts out with an advertisement playing from inside a house talking about a masochist farm, and then Rick instantly forgives Morty for eating his food and says he needs his help. Rick finally tracked down the location of the most valuable substance, a hallucinogenic called the sauce that would literally transport you to far across the universe. So it's magical because it's alien stuff. He's naturally asked if he could just make it, and he says he still needs enough material for the analysis to reverse engineer its structure, and he's even tried. And after years scanning galaxies for the sauce, which must be just a code name because it's so uncreative and indistinct, he found it on a planet. Why didn't he find out where it was immediately from asking around the Citadel of Ricks? Wouldn't Ricks have a place where they combined all of their knowledge of the multiverse to make the stuff faster? I guess he doesn't do it out of pride. He'd rather find out independently. I wonder why Rick had a rough landing on the planet. He says he can't believe they survived that. That makes me wonder why they aren't hurt. I guess they've got healing nanobots in them, but that should be explained. You can't really say it would ruin the tension because we all know they have plot armor anyways. The tension is they don't want to get hurt. Rick finds the sauce by tracking its energy signature from holding something in front of his eyes, and he digs and finds a red pill to eat. You'd think Morty would run away as soon as he would because he wouldn't want him to hurt him. Rick praises this thing right away and jumps to the conclusion that the planet doesn't have a name yet with no evidence when it's breathable. I guess he used a scanning device to find out the atmosphere of the planet was breathable before he set foot on it. Then he gets threatened by armed people behind him who can hover because of the technology they've got. And somehow Morty knows they're called space pirates when they don't look like it. It would be cartoony of them to look like pirates. Rick aims a weapon and tells Morty to run even though they're greatly outnumbered. Sadly, the reason they don't have a portal gun isn't explained, and Morty runs away and people shove him to the ground. Even if he was armed or knew to use body modifications to protect himself, he'd have still suffered this fate because he'd have been running away with his back to them. The Jerry of this planet says the planet's being claimed in the name of a baron with a ridiculous name who reminds me of Morty's teacher. He has a ridiculous name just so Rick can lighten things up making fun of it, which is only okay to see because the baron's unlikable. He can tell Rick's eating the sauce because of his eyes, and it's sure it's convenient that they're both using the same nickname for the thing. They get asked for their last words, which is a convenient cartoony waste of time for no reason to buy them some time, and then their enemies panic from a noise and fly away. They get threatened by a giant alien that Rick's weapon can't hurt. Rick reassures Morty by breaking the fourth wall when he wouldn't know for sure if they're going to be okay and how many pages they have left to go. I guess he knows he doesn't know for sure. Morty's useful in a creative way by getting sick, and luckily the alien's miraculously more interested in licking that instead of eating the much bigger sources of nutrients in front of it that's solid food. And it's not like they never eat people, or why did the people run away from it? Why did it even try to bother them if it was only thirsty and not hungry? Even wild animals hunt for sport. Rick figures out how the sauce gets produced. It comes from the alien. And it reminds him of an alien coffee that's produced in a gross way. At least that's creative, even if it's unnecessarily vulgar, because it took more effort from the writer than just having the sauce be a convenience pill buried in a desert. Rick gets grabbed from behind and complains about people in cloaks stealing the blue stuff, and one of them says the worm will be back, so he should be quiet. And another warns them that the Baron will be back too, so they need to move fast. They're taken to a place where they're safe from the worms, and it turns out all these people in cloaks are women, including Beth and Jessica. I guess the black lines on their faces are just painted on because it's the culture's tradition, and it's something they're so used to after generations that they don't care that it makes them look like they've got mustaches. Their special suits convert their urine to drinking water so no drop is wasted because water's rare, and the sandworms are always attracted by water and sound. Morty introduces himself and says he and Rick are tourists from Earth. Probably because of something Rick does, someone with glowing blue contacts says one of them might be the one. Sure would be convenient if this planet had magical psychics that could see the future and find out one that might be the one before they showed up. There's much needed levity after that because Summer complains that living on a rock sucks because she keeps getting sand in her eyes and her contacts are expensive. She must not be used to living in a place like this, which is surprising because I thought she grew up here. She acts like she just moved here. It'd be unique if they never had a Rick, hence why they don't recognize this one. Beth says they should take the test, and Summer hands Rick a box with a button. Rick's relatably bored and impatient with this, and reacts sarcastically. I really appreciate that he's here, even if he's being obnoxious, because if the story took itself too seriously the whole time, I wouldn't like it. And since this is a comedy franchise, it not only has the right to have levity in the serious scenes, it's outright required. Rick presses a button and reassures Morty. It's shocking to see Beth threaten Morty into reaching for the button, even if she isn't literally his Beth. He generates a Mr. Meeseeks and passes the test. So the box must be specifically programmed to only work for Mortys. Why couldn't he always be that responsible? So it's a box that was left behind by accident. And the Rick was too lazy to just put a portal below it to just send it back home. Since Morty wanted a glass of water earlier, he can't be forgiven for impulsively asking for one right now. But Rick's right that he should have asked for a gallon of water. And it looks like the comic breaks the rules about how Meeseeks work, because there's no explanation for how the Meeseeks actually got him a glass of water instantly. I would think that he'd run off and end up going crazy because he'd never find him that much water, or be lucky he even has a glass to put in if he does. They're not genies. In fact, didn't Rick say they're not gods in their first episode? So they don't have magic powers. So the only reason this is forgivable is that it's a franchise all about other dimensions, so I can assume this is a special alternate universe where Meeseeks are gods. I guess in this place the Meeseeks box was made by someone even more powerful than the one who usually makes those boxes. Like a witch. People pick up Morty cheering that he's the one, and Morty becomes a part of the tribe. Rick does some welding later, wanting to escape in a spaceship. How does he have the welding mask and stuff here? I guess he got it from his spaceship. He was brilliant enough to keep it there just in case. He tells Morty he fixed the ship, and naturally Morty doesn't want to leave because they need him. Rick admits he needs him too, which is sweet by his standards because he usually wouldn't say that. Especially since he can just replace him with a clone and erase his memory of the fact that he had to leave him here. Plus he could make a robot, so he doesn't really need him. Morty calls him out because he found a place where he belongs. He still follows them, and I can only assume it's because he knows Rick would force him to come along with them anyways, as he could just put a portal below him at home even if he said no. I feel bad for Morty and these people. I wish they'd send a clone Morty here to take his place who could do that for them too. Rick should say that. Rick reminds Morty of where they get their water and he agrees. Inconveniently, they get threatened by the Baron and his men on the walk home even though it's night. They want the sauce. Rick tells Morty to eat it and he's worried because he thinks he can't and has to tell himself he'll hold it down. And Rick does something that summons the giant worm. Morty says there's no place like home multiple times, and I assume it's to comfort himself, and he gets told to wake up on the couch. Beth says he got the worst case of food poisoning she ever saw. I like that she calls him Sweetie and puts her hand on his back. She says she didn't know he could get delirious from food poisoning, and he wonders if it was a dream, but it wasn't, thankfully. So Rick ends the story with the MacGuffin after all. Rick and Morty presents Time Zoo. Rick refuses to waste his time on another soulless reboot that he says only idiots would buy for doing no new work. It's satisfying because most reboots suck, although it's not like they literally do no new work. Nothing in the story matters until Rick explains that his quantum bot runs on the potential energy between possible universes. By observing it, Jerry's forcing it to pick a universe, rendering it useless. If it's so easily rendered useless, why is it in the middle of their kitchen? Especially if it can cause a fire somehow. I guess it's so that he can shame Jerry for causing the fire. Rick says he installed a new sprinkler system, and somehow that works too well when he knows technology. Morty says in response to Summer's midlife crisis that Rick doesn't flip out when stuff changes despite being old. when he should know he's the exception because he's not like most people. It is amusing that Rick says such stilted dialogue that makes fun of himself for talking to himself because he's such a jokester. He's upset about seeing a new can of spray cheese with a note on it that wouldn't be there. Rick decides to get his family in the spaceship one after the other to escape the planet while lying that things are normal. He probably figures that it's so ridiculous that spray cheese would get a reboot that it has to be that he and his family were put in a simulation. There's no way that people would think it's lame that Summer's gonna ride in a spaceship. Rick flies away from the planet, and somehow Beth assumes that he made her get rid of the minivan just because he can't break the space-time continuum. Rick says if he's wrong about this, reality will shatter. Then why doesn't he just try to go through a portal to another dimension? Someone says there's a breach in the 21st century and a button is pressed to cause a reboot. The start of the issue repeats itself, except much shorter because Rick doesn't do any venting. There's no reason that only he would retain his memories, making his efforts to get his family together pointless. Unless he only retains his memories because he's a cyborg connected to Operation Phoenix. And so while he briefly lost his new memories, he got them back from an automatic memory backup, like when he gets brought back to life. Somehow Jerry instantly figures out that Rick has deja vu for no reason. The alien says the spray cheese was removed and thinks he's off the hook, when obviously Rick still noticed something was wrong. He tells Morty a valuable lesson that family is the worst reason to do something and doesn't explain why, and says his quantum bot should have exploded when Jerry looked at it. Then why did he put it in the kitchen? He tells someone that he's stealing his spray cheese. It would be more likely than someone walking around outside holding that can when it's from his house. Beth lampshades at Summer is bitchy, and Rick triumphs over the thief and tells Morty to eat the whole can. While saying a badass line, "The last person who called me little had their legs teleported into the sun." The thief gets away, which could have been prevented because Rick would have shot him. Why would he need the whole contents when just a little sample would be enough? Despite not seeing the spray can label, Rick conveniently knows they're about to have time rewound on them. So he admits, "I just want to say how much I love and respect all of you. I know that it can be difficult, but it's been so great living with all of you." Beth says that's sweet. It's sad that he doesn't want them to remember him saying that when he has nothing to gain from the alternative. It's actually amusing when Morty's like, "Geez, Rick, I just wanted to see if you wanted to watch a movie." And it turns out he made him full of processed cheese, and Rick's got a hold of a button, and it points sharp stuff at him from the ceiling. Rick says they can't reset Morty's stomach, even though obviously they would be able to because they're clearly sending their minds to different universe versions of themselves to achieve this. I love that after Beth calls him out, she says, "Wow, I can't believe that's even a sentence I have to say out loud." It may be annoying that the story's only happening because the comic is doing a reboot, but at least there's a couple of great lines in this to make it worth it. It's an uphill battle though in a story that entirely takes place in the most boring part of Earth. I don't come to Rick and Morty to see Earth. Rick says he found out that the reboot of sprayed cheese is the same formula as the original version of the sprayed cheese he likes. He starts boringly ranting that society thinks it needs new inventions. Eventually he complains that reboots and all songs on the radio sounding the same means that humanity is out of ideas. Rick insists that Jerry hasn't ever had an original idea, even though he just came up with a new silly slogan. Rick says that the fact that humanity's out of ideas means his family was kidnapped and forced to live in a Groundhog Day loop. Clearly this was the case with people before they were kidnapped, and it doesn't mean that. And plus he's just assuming no new ideas happen anymore because he's a pessimist while not trying to find the new ideas. He's right though, but that's because fiction's millennia old, and Star Trek used up every sci-fi idea that wouldn't have been come up with centuries ago. The people who want them stuck in a time loop are time tourists. Turns out Summer was kidnapped by the yellow alien now and not much earlier, because I guess he took this long to realize they're not so different, because she does a lot of references to old movies. Why does computers think that she wouldn't think he looks hideous? And it wouldn't be like Summer to take back an insult. Why doesn't he take on a human form right after this then if this hurt his feelings? He says he doesn't want to look forward to the future because he thinks it'll be full of new problems. Translation, he's a coward. He somehow insists that the past is what everyone loves because it's safe. How is it safe when a lot of people were given unfair treatment compared to now? At least he's not showing off the pre-civil rights movement era. But then he should just say the 1980s, like he's showing. He brought her here to help him run this time zoo because he's insecure enough to think he needs help. She says the name needs work and he agrees, but says it's too late now. Rick tells his family to act like they usually do because they get rid of circus animals that can't perform. The story's boring right now. Rick smartly assumes Summer's better off than them. He says when you reboot, you only focus on the most signature parts. Unless the comic has to get rid of all the ideas from the previous writers that gave it its whole identity by order of Archie. He says as more reboots happen, everything original and special gets washed away. He just contradicted himself. Why wouldn't the most signature parts be the original and special parts? Why would most reboots do this when it'd clearly be less profitable? Because they're getting rid of everything that they bought it for in the first place. And then the story gets boring again. Summer says they should get some boy bands and it's called Brilliant and thanks the bad guy. Then she gets bored because she's told she could order from a restaurant she always orders from and she wants to try something new. She's warned that the new place could mess up their order because he's a coward who doesn't trust new restaurants. It's stupid of him to not even let her do this though. Of course she's gonna turn on him. Summer looks at her family, and Rick says every time they do something that isn't normal, they get rebooted. So at least if they pretend to be fine with this, they get to eat breakfast. I wish he at least explained why he isn't going through a portal. Summer gets to press a button to open the door for new spray cheese because somehow the coward bad guy trusted her not to betray him and left her unsupervised. So she gets herself conveniently warped back to the ground in front of her house, so I have to assume she pressed a button to do that. It wouldn't be confusing if she had a tractor beam above her, implying that she was sent floating down to the ground. But she's not even wearing a belt, so I could think she was teleported that way. Why would grabbing spray cheese do this? She creatively sprays the zookeepers with spray cheese in the eyes and hugs her mom. Smartly, Jerry asks her if she could put in a good word for him. And the bad guy tells her she betrayed him, even though he did nothing that inconvenienced him yet. All she did was visit her family. And sure, not going back to him at all would betray him, but it's too early to say she has. For all he knows, she would have come back to him after a day of having to deal with this. He warns her that she'll get old, but how can she if he's planning to keep her in a time loop? She calls him lame, and he says attack to pointlessly get the zookeeper family to hit them. Too bad I don't always see the impact in the fight scene, rendering it pointless. The alien says that the true power of nostalgia was forgotten by them, and that the past also includes their most embarrassing moments. Even though if it's really nostalgic, it's not going to be something that you're ashamed of. He plants to press a button and reminds them of their bad memories. Best is the boring one because we already know it. Plus it thinks that we're in season 1 where she hasn't reconciled with Jerry yet. Rick's smart enough to figure out for no reason that only Summer can stop this because everything she does is embarrassing just because she's a teenager, supposedly. If someone's truly confident, they won't think that about everything they did back then. She somehow escapes the purple energy fields because Deus Ex Machina. You'd think Morty would get to do this because he's also a teenager and he's the lame one. It makes sense though because he prefers Summer. She throws Rick the handbag. Rick gets excited to press a button to reboot the universe, even though obviously all that would do is the same thing that the alien put him through as before. Why would it matter who the person was that pressed the button? I assume the remote scans your brain to see what you want to happen, so he creates horrible looking Rick monsters to fight the zookeeper. The alien says he's ruining his childhood, but I don't think Rick and Morty existed that long. He's younger than I thought. He says he plans to reset the system, and Summer says the reboot button wasn't what she got Rick and tells him to look for his quantum butt. He says if enough eyes are on it, the robot that he made for no reason turns into a ticking time bomb that destroys the planet and forces Rick to flee the place with his family, who conveniently were able to escape in time for no reason. Morty asks, when did the nostalgia war even kidnap us? Somehow, instead of Rick simply saying everyone sleeps, so of course they could get kidnapped, he has a typical hack writer response by demonizing every time a smart person criticizes the writing. He insists that you can't enjoy a work of fiction if you're using your brain, even though your brain is what you need to use to appreciate things. And if he did question fiction before, he'd know that sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it's the only way you can get fun out of something. The only reason I don't regret reading bad stories is I got to make reviews out of them. There's only two types of people who use this argument of Rick's, and both of them are idiots. Why am I saying an earlier point in time where the main characters are planning to watch the new movie Morty talked about, and the end of the story trying a new restaurant just for Morty to get given the wrong order? This whole story ranted about old ideas just to mostly demonize the idea of a new experience in the end. This was by Amy Chu and Alexander Chen. This story was about Rick taking Morty in a spaceship to a planet with a pill in it that supposedly causes hallucinations. But there's no indication that it actually does, when I thought it endangered Morty because of that. So it's just a thin excuse for them to go to a desert full of tribes where Jerry and Beth are on opposite sides. Because Morty can press a button on a Meeseeks box and make it work, the tribe likes him, and it's disappointing that we never learn why only he can make it work. But at least I can figure that out for myself. And Rick made it that way to be responsible, and he left it here by mistake, because he forgot it. It'd be underwhelming if they simply walked back to Rick's spaceship at night after he fixed it. So it was technically good that they got ambushed by the Baron's tribe, even if I still thought it was bullshit because they should all still be asleep. I assume they tracked Rick down and were waiting for Morty and him to come around here, and were too scared of the other tribe to come to them. They're not even a real threat because Rick can summon a giant alien to scare them and conveniently get Morty to warp him home. Normally a story with him MacGuffin as his excuse would make me wonder why Rick didn't put a portal below the thing to send it to him instead of going to it with Morty. But it's justified because it was buried and he just tracked down its energy signature to here. And will it be safer to send a robot here to find it? He'd be like, where's the fun in that? So this was a good issue. And the main reason is that it keeps surprising us with levity, when it could have easily taken itself too seriously from all the tribespeople being annoyingly serious. And that'd be off-putting. Unfortunately, the levity isn't memorable enough for me, so anytime I think about it, I still just remember how annoyingly serious the tribespeople are. This story is about Rick and his family being in a time loop, again. But this time it's constrained to just a few settings from their property, so that's boring. And all that happened is Rick discovering and proving it, and then insisting that his family act the same way they did at the boring beginning. What's the point if they're not all taking advantage of the Groundhog Day loop, trying to do fun things or teach themselves new skills? The villain had a believable excuse, and it's a mockery of nostalgic people who can't appreciate the good that comes with the future. But what's the point? And Rick mocks reboots as uncreative, even though I'm sure the only reason the story was made was because the main comic got rebooted in 2020, and it's hardly with less creativity. I guess the story was good because it was interesting and it had a few great lines. It's just the ending that sucks, destroying a world and contradicting the moral.